All right. And we're live. Gringo in Latin America podcast. I'm with Maria. Maria, how are you doing today? And how's it going for you in this quarantine time that we're experiencing right now?
Hey, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing well, actually. All things considered, I think we're finishing week 10 in quarantine or stay at home. And it's,
At least someone's counting.
oh, I have been counting. But yeah, overall, I can't complain. I'm able to work from home. So all is well.
Cool. So, I mean, before we get started, I think it's best maybe just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do and some of the things that you're doing these days.
Sure. A little bit about myself. Well, I was born in El Salvador, and but I grew up in Florida, and I went to college at Florida State University, so I'm a proud Seminole. And then once I got my master's degree, my bachelor's and my master's, I ended up getting a job in Orlando, so I was there for a few months, and then I was recruited to come up to the DC area to work for federal government. So I've been in this area for about 12 years now. And right now I currently work at NASA. So I'm a key advisor to NASA senior leaders. I guess you can say I do strategy, policy, and communications.
Strategy, policy, and communications. What exactly does that mean?
Oh, goodness. It's a fancy way of saying I advise the chief scientist. So we take a look at all of the scientific goals for the agency, and our office is responsible for um, uh, being an advisor to the administrator and the administration, and also making sure that we are uh, sharing the science with not only the scientific community but the public at large.
And what did you study in Florida State?
I am not a scientist, actually. I get that question a lot. Are
Yeah,
you
you just
me or are
you
you
just
a scientist?
advise the scientists. That's great.
No, so my education was actually international affairs, political science. My goal was actually to work in foreign affairs or foreign service. And then I have a master's in public administration. So the reason why I ended up going into public service is, because of my background, which I'll be happy to share more with you later on. But I felt like I wanted to be in public service. And so I'm a lucky girl because I ended up in DC working for, a lead agency here, and I actually love my job. So,
Wow,
yeah.
that's very cool. So, I mean, you and I met when I was hosting Arte Agave in DC. You were with the Pro Hispanica group. Tell me a little bit more about that organization. And I don't know, you sit on the board, or you're the vice president, or what's your role with them, and what does that group do?
Sure. When I first met you at Arte Agave, I had just become the Vice President of Membership for Prospanica DC. So Prospanica is a national organization. It's been around for over 30 years, and it advocates on behalf of Latino professionals. A few years ago, I decided that I wanted to focus on activities outside of my job. And so I was taking a look at professional organizations or boards that I could become part of. And Prospanica DC attracted me because, I know pretty much everybody on the board and many of the members. And so they have been recruiting me for some time. And I figured, I liked their mission. And so I definitely accepted their to become their member, vice president of membership. And so when I met you, I think that was one of my first activities in my new role. And so we have a good number of Latino professionals here in DC. And yeah, so we just try to encourage each other, empower each other, share resources, networks to, help the community.
Wow, how large is the organization, or how many members do you have? today?
Well, our chapter has a little less than 150
Hmm.
active members, but of course we've had, we've been around for 30 plus years. So, but active members, we have a little less than 150. So we're always recruiting, of course.
Nice. So all right. So there's different chapters in every
Yes.
state has a different chapter? Or
Not every state, but most states.
they do.
Mhm.
Cool. Cool. And so what kind of or events, I mean, or, what things does Pro Hispanica do? Is it just, kind of showcasing different people, like different Latin people in the area, or, what do you, is there normally events when we're allowed to get together, or, what's
Yeah,
the day to day or month to month?
Yeah, so our chapter actually last year received the award for Chapter of the Year. So we're a very
Nice.
active organization. So we host events every month. They can range from uh, sessions on financial literacy, how to apply for jobs, how to build your networks. How to meet professionals in the community. We recently did a virtual event with people from the Census to talk about the importance of getting counted and what it means for the Latino community.
Mm.
So events like that, and we also partner with a lot of local organizations, and they sponsor a lot of those activities with us. So it's about bringing professionals together. So we also work very closely with the federal government organizations, and we try to help them to recruit and hire Latino professionals as well.
Nice. Now, I mean, obviously, you're super connected to the Latino community in DC. With COVID-19 happening right now, I mean, what's the effects, or have you seen any? Obviously, a lot of people are hurting right now. What's the effects that's happening with the Latin community, or jobs, people, anything that you see that's really standing out right now, within the community?
So, and I am in no way an expert at this stuff, right? So this question, I'm going to respond
Nobody is.
from
We've
from
seen the
a
politicians.
yeah.
Nobody's an expert. I think they just announced today that COVID doesn't even stick on surfaces anymore. Like who
Yeah,
knows?
every
So,
day is something
yeah.
different. So I'm gonna respond with like my personal opinions or what I have seen. Unfortunately, Latinos have taken a huge hit with COVID-19. Um, many uh, of many of the service industry
Mhm.
people tend to be Latinos.
Yeah.
You look at in the kitchens, in the bar backs at restaurants, at bars. I mean, from services across the board, a lot of those jobs are held by Latinos, which means that they're unemployed. I think I read the other day that 7 out of 10 Latinos are currently unemployed because of COVID-19, right? So our community is hurting. And then I don't want to get into the politics of it all, but there is a large population, and it's no secret that there's a large population of Latinos who are undocumented or in the process of applying for citizenship. And so there are a lot of uncertainties in what resources are available to them, and if they receive any of those services, would that impact them being able to obtain legal status or obtain citizenship later on down the road.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of uncertainty there. People are scared. And, especially with every state operating differently. And not only that, but there a lot of, it took a while for resources to be provided in Spanish language.
Mm.
I know LULAC, which is the leading organization for the Hispanic community, has been advocating and pushing COVID-19 materials to be printed in Spanish as well. Because a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, but there's a large group of Latinos that, language, Spanish is their first language or their only language.
Wow. So, I mean, it's something you don't even think about when, some people can't even understand what's happening because they can't read, because everything's coming out in English. So what was your, let's get into you a little bit more. You kind of glossed over that. Tell me about like, your upbringing and where are you, like, where specifically are you from? And what were some of like your interests like growing up? I mean, you're obviously doing a ton of stuff. I mean, you're pro Hispanica and you're the one that scientists are talking to. So where did all this kind of start for you? Was there any inspiration and any mentors along the way?
Sure. So, honestly, when I came to this country, I was young when I got here. Of course, I had to learn English, but a lot of my family members don't speak English and they only speak Spanish, right? And so moving from El Salvador, we moved during the civil wars in El Salvador. So that was pretty traumatic, to leave the country that you know. Even though I was still young, I mean, I still remember it. The country that you know.
How old were you when do you remember how old you were?
I was probably like 6. Yeah, I was 6. And so, but I remember walking home and hearing bombs in the distance, right? Like that was like everyday occurrence back in the day. And so it just got really dangerous. And so we ended up moving to this little town in Florida, south of Tampa. It's called Parrish, Florida. And I mean, it's country, it's small. And we were like the only Salvadoran family in the area.
Okay.
So pretty much everyone around us they were Mexicans. Okay. And believe it or not, there's a big difference between the Mexican cuisine and El Salvador, and even in the language, right? We speak different dialects. And so not only did we have to move to a whole new country, but then we also had to acculturate into the Mexican culture, right? We had to learn to eat how they ate because we were the only Salvadoran family, which meant that like food that we were accustomed to was not available at the time. This was 30 years ago, right? And so it's not like we would go to a restaurant and get some pupusas or chata. Back in the day, pupusas, that's what Salvadorians eat. Well, come on.
That's why I'm talking to you right now. What is, say that word again and tell me what it is.
So El Salvador is known for pupusas.
Okay.
And actually, DC has a huge Salvadorian population. So here, there are pupusas everywhere, right? Okay. So there are the El Salvadorian population is so large in this area. When I moved from Florida to here, when I was in Florida, I was unique because no one else was from El Salvador, was my age, but then I come here and everybody is from El Salvador. But so anyway, so I grew up in this little town in Florida, and it was very interesting growing up. Unfortunately, the Civil War was very traumatic for members of my family. So my mom actually did not really raise us knowing our culture deeply, unfortunately. My siblings were a lot older than me. I'm the youngest of 8. And there's a big age gap between me and everyone else. And so they were a little older than me, so they were already very knowledgeable about the Salvadoran culture. Me, unfortunately, I grew up, like I said, knowing the Mexican culture more than Salvador. And then, in school, um, yeah, they don't really teach you about Latinos or Latin America. So I cannot think of a single class that
Yeah.
I took where they taught me about, Latino representation or Latino history. I
Yeah.
cannot think of, I mean, I knew Latinos that worked in education, of course, because they were working in the schools or whatever, but I didn't really know, I can't say I knew a lot of professionals that went to college that
Yeah.
looked like me.
Mm.
Um, my sister, Veronica, who's the one before me, she's 5 years older than me, and she ended up like breaking doors, right? So she actually went to a community college. And so that was huge for my family because we're the first ones. All of my other siblings are married and have their own families, but my sister Veronica and I actually attended school here or in Florida. And so she was a trailblazer because she actually got her high school diploma and then actually went on to a community college. And so then I was the first one to then go to like a 4-year state university. So growing up, I was an honor student. My my mother is a migrant worker, so my mother actually worked in the fields, and I used to do stints in the field as well. And so it didn't take long for me to realize this is not the life that I was made for. I
Right.
can't hack it. I would starve because I am not good at this work. And so I focused on my studies because I wanted to and I never thought about going to college, well, honestly.
Right.
I wanted to get my high school education because that was like the goal of my mom was like, if you can at least get your high school degree or education, I'll be so happy. But she was a single mom, so I try to help out as much as I could. But I just focused after working in the fields and realizing I have to do something.
Mhm.
I just focused in school. And I just wanted to just get my degree thinking I could then go out into the workforce and make money. And my mom could then retire because I was going to help her.
Yeah.
I wanted to get like a secretary job. And I thought once I get that, I'll be set. My mom will be set. She doesn't have to work in the fields anymore. But lucky for me, I had a couple guidance counselors who must have, seen something in me. And they got me into the Upper Bound program. One lady in particular got me into the Upper Bound program, which is for first generation students to take classes at the local college during the weekends and during the summers. And then they help you prep for college. But I wasn't interested in going to college because I just wanted to work. But then they said, we'll give you a stipend. I said, oh, okay,
I'll take
sign
that.
me up. They said, we'll give you a stipend. We'll travel around the country to colleges and universities. We'll give you free housing during the summer. I said, okay, let's do this. And so the summer before my senior year, there was a guidance counselor in the Upper Bound program, and she gave us an assignment. And she said, I need you to go home and complete 3 or 4 college applications and bring them next time you come. Well, I never planned to go to college. Well, so Maria did not complete those applications. And I have never seen anyone so disappointed. I mean, the look of disappointment in her face just killed me. So after that, I went to my dorm and I completed those applications. I applied to, Florida State University, USF, UF, UCF, University of Miami. And I handed those to her next time I saw her and didn't think much of it after that, right? Next thing I know, I got accepted into all those colleges.
Wow.
They paid for the application fee, and she actually mailed those out on my behalf. And I got full ride. I got accepted to all the colleges and I was offered free ride. And the day came when I told my mom, you know, I got in. And so she was happy, but she wasn't too happy when she realized her baby was going to leave home. You know, she's very conservative. She was forced to be very strict because she was a single parent raising a bunch of kids. Uh, you know, and so she basically said, well, if you want to go to college, you're going to go to the community college down the street, just like your sister. And that's when my guidance counselors were coming to her and trying to talk to her, family members trying to talk to her, trying to get her to understand that this was a really great opportunity and that I needed to go. Yeah. And my mother was so adamant that her baby was not going to leave home, because if you're going to leave home, it's to get married. You're not going to go off to college 4 hours away on your own, you know. And so it was, it's part of that culture, right? Because she didn't know this American culture. She only knew what she had been exposed to. Right. And a lot of older parents or parents that immigrated from other countries to this country are very much the same, especially when it comes to the women. You know, unfortunately, they're a little more strict with us. And so she said, no, she's not going. And so I said, oh, well, you know, I tried. But it was my sister, Veronica, who actually said that, no, I was going to go to college. And she actually packed my stuff, threw everything in her little car, and drove me off to college. My mother was not happy.
Wow.
Yeah, so she did not even want to go to drop me off to college.
So she didn't even understand that you had a full ride, and this was to Florida State, right? Or
yeah, I ended up going to Florida State. Yeah,
which is very expensive and a very good school. And wow.
But that's something that's part of the culture, right? So it's very important for people to understand that there's a cultural difference when you're talking to people that were born outside of this country. And so you always, when you're talking to Latinos, you can't think of Latinos as a monolithic group, right? We're very diverse. But then you also can't assume that what you think is right and what you're accustomed to here, and when I say you, I mean like us, you know, here in the US, can't assume, well, that's a no-brainer. Why would she be against it? But in her culture, or, you know, in that culture, it was seen as, you know, a woman, oh my God, living by herself at 18, she's gonna come back and she's gonna, you know, she's gonna go wild. She's gonna come back pregnant. And I heard that a lot, Walt, that I was going to, you know, come back pregnant.
Well, so what if it was your brother that did that? Would that have mattered? Was it because of you and you're female? Or,
no, my brother could do no harm. My brother could do whatever he wanted.
So your brother would have been fine, like, go, leave, bye.
Oh yes, definitely. It's because we're females for sure. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So anyway, so I ended up going to Florida State University. I had never even visited the campus. Honestly, the only reason why I applied to that school along with the 4 other schools was because they had won the national football championship in '99, the year before I graduated. And that's how I knew about FSU. I looked at my friend and I said, what's that school that won the championship last year? And she's like, Florida State. I said, yeah. So, you know, I completed my application and thank God, everything worked out. And now, like I said, I'm a huge Seminole proud alumni because they took a huge chance on me. And so very grateful.
Wow. So all that, I mean, and then, I mean, so when did it get to a point with like your mom, you know, did it take a year or 2 years, 4 years where she's like, okay, everything's good, like, you know?
Yeah. So I think once she saw that I was living on my own and also contributing, I was helping her because, like I said, I had a full ride. Oh, let me tell you. So the first semester of college, I didn't know people. So I saw this flyer on a bulletin that said, they're starting a new Latin night at this place called The Moon. It's a new Latin night. So if you're looking for a job, stop by on this date at this hour. And so, I didn't need a job because I was on a full ride, but I wanted to have something to do. And I wanted to meet people, and I figured, why not? And maybe they have waitressing positions. I've never been a waitress in when I was in high school, I was in retail. I worked at Levi's and Reebok and Polo, but I had never actually been a waitress. But I figured, how hard can it be? So I went and I applied for this job, and they said, okay, come back in I think in like 2 days. So I come back to work, and I said, hi, I'm here for the waitressing position. And they said, we don't have waitresses here. This is a club. You're going to bartend.
Okay.
Wait, first of all, I had never even been in a club. Okay. Second of all, I didn't even really drink. I had drank once when I was in high school. Shh, don't tell my mom. I think it was around prom time or something, but that's it. And so I'm sitting there or standing there going, well, what do I do? And I figured, you know what, let's just try it. They said, we'll train you. Don't worry. You don't have to know anything. All right, fine. So I was making really good money as a bartender. And so that money that I was making, I was sending home, I was contributing to the household. So my mom, I think that gave her peace of mind, knowing that not only am I going to school, but she's being, responsible.
Yep.
And so I would say it probably took her almost a year to come around to the idea that I was away in college. Plus, I tried to go home as much as I could.
Yeah.
But I never told my mom that I was a bartender until I graduated 4 years later.
Wow.
Because of course, she's very strict. So I was definitely not pregnant. Exactly. So in Florida State was amazing because it was actually the first opportunity I would say that I got exposure to Latin America. Remember I said growing up in school, there were no classes. We didn't learn about Latino history or anything like that. But then I think it was my sophomore year, I signed up for an elective class. It was called Latin American History, I think, and then another in Latin American Literature. And I fell in love. I just immersed myself in these classes because for the first time I felt like, oh my gosh, I had no idea of all the amazing contributions the Latinos have made. And, I learned about our art and our music and our culture and to better appreciate the Spanish language. And I was hooked. And I remember learning when we finally got to Central America, I remember hearing about El Salvador, and I had no idea. And I remember calling my mother and saying, Mom, this is what they covered in class today. Is it true? And my mom, that's when she eventually started opening up to me and actually sharing more about life in El Salvador and what it was to be there during the Civil Wars and before the Civil War. And we actually started bonding over that, right, over our history. And that I think that's when I started actually appreciating my heritage, my history, and ever since then, I am so proud to be Latina, to be representing my people. And I'm lucky to be working in federal government because I feel like our government needs to be representative of the people. And so, but to be honest with you, well, when you get to a certain level, you don't really see a lot of people that look like me, right? And so I always try to advocate for more representation. I've been doing that for over 10 years. When I first moved to DC, my background, or when I first moved to DC, I'm sorry, I started my career in human resources. So that meant that I had access to a lot of data. And when I took a look at this data and population and personnel numbers, I was just shocked at the fact that Latinos were just not represented at all. We hardly existed when it came to federal government, and especially when it came to supervisory or leadership positions. And I started asking a lot of questions as to what's going on here. Why are the numbers so low? And I eventually, I guess I made enough noise to.
Yeah. So wait, let me stop you. When you were asking those questions, like, was it like, hey, what's going on here? Or was it like, hey, what's going on here Monday? Hey, what's going on here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Like, tell me a little bit about this noise.
I think it was more of, hey, what's going on here? Because I took a look at historical data, right? So I wasn't just looking at snaps in time. And I just saw that the numbers are pretty much stagnant for decades. And so I was just so curious. And then somebody approached me and said, hey, you have a lot of energy and a lot of passion. I think it's so interesting when people like say, I'm so passionate about something.
They're true,
so
though.
You have a lot of.
That's definitely true about you. I would say the same exact thing.
Yeah. And so you have a lot of energy and passion. And so we think you should lead this employee resource group for the agency. And so basically I became like the advocate for Latinos at this agency nationwide. And here I am, like this really young, I said really, yeah, really young, short Latina, just like raising my voice. But I loved it. And then people started coming together and just sharing stories. And anyway, so I did that for a few years, and then one thing led to another, and I actually made a career out of that, let me tell you. Because what happened was, remember I said that my career started in human resources? Yeah. Well, I started doing all this extra work in other areas that I soon started doing more communications. I started doing diversity reporting for the agency. They made me that diversity recruiter for the agency. So it was up to me to create a program that focused on recruitment and retention of Latinos in the federal government. And so I was the one, when I first started, I was doing it like out of the goodness of my heart, right? I wasn't getting paid for this. I had my regular HR job. So this was me going out into to talk to colleges and universities and just sharing information about federal government and what it was like to, to join and what you should do to be part of federal government. And so anyway, before I knew it, my boss said that they wanted to create a diversity program. It was basically, I was going to lead it. And so I did that. And I started dabbling into communications and social media. This was back in the day when social media, I was actually one of the first ones using social media at the federal government level. And it was interesting because when you would talk to Latinos, they didn't really, and you would say, hey, we're hiring. They would say, and this is another agency, by the way, not the one that I'm with now. And they didn't really think of the federal government as an employer. And you never saw federal government agencies out, competing with like IBM and Deloitte and all those other companies. And I was, so I was like out there doing my own thing and advocating for, Latino representation. And so I moved to another agency, and same thing. They had heard about the work that I did with previous agency, and they wanted to replicate it in this new agency. And then I moved to the new agency, NASA. And on orientation day, I'm not lying, day one, they came to me and said, we want to create a Latino group, and we heard about you, and we want you to lead it. And I said, first of all, I don't know anyone here. I did not know anyone. I said, I feel like I should probably get to learn my job first. But they stayed on me and stayed on me. And eventually, a few months later, we created the first Latino employee resource group at NASA headquarters. So I served, so we're getting ready to serve or to celebrate our 5-year anniversary. And let me tell you, this agency has been amazing because it's one thing for leaders to take a look at the data and see that there's underrepresentation across the board. And they just didn't know it, versus leaders who see the data, they know it, but they don't care. So I present the data. Anytime I go talk to a leader or senior leaders at an agency, I come with data. I like to do my research. And so these leaders have been so supportive. They put their trust in me and basically said, you have free reign. We want you at the table. Bring us recommendations. We support you. And we have been doing incredible events and education efforts at NASA headquarters. It's been great.
Wow. A lot going on again. So I want to ask you a question. You mentioned like school a couple of times, and there's nothing about Latin, Latinos, Latinas, and you and I, we saw the John Leguizamo show when he was, searching for a Latin leader for his son in school, and there was no one there. Yep. If I could give you like the magic wand, I mean, what would you integrate into, schools today as far as Latinos, Latinas? I mean, obviously there's a lot, right? But I mean, is there any specifics? Because I mean, I went to public school as well, and I mean, it's literally like there was the Mexican War, and that was a thing for a page, and besides that, there's nothing. So, is there anything that you would, if you could sit down with the leaders of educational system today and say, hey, these are the top few things that we have to at least start putting in there? Is there anything that really stands out that you think should be integrated first and foremost into our educational system?
Yeah, so I've been out of school for a while, but I can only talk about what was lacking when I was there. And I would definitely make sure that they start students early or at a young age, learning their geography, especially when it comes to the Western Hemisphere. A lot of students don't really know where a lot of these countries are. They don't know the difference between El Salvador versus Argentina, or and then also focusing on the positives from different regions. There are a lot of negative stereotypes that are assigned to people from Latin America, but I would definitely highlight some history makers, Julio Cesar Chavez, Isabel Allende. I mean, I can't even give you a list of people, but definitely focusing on historical figures, people that have made huge contributions in different areas, right? In the arts and in science. Science, by the way, is an area that we still have a lot of work to do because we're starting to know more about Latinos in other areas. artists, you have people like J-Lo, Ricky Martin, whatever. And then art in language and history and all these different areas. But when it comes to science, you know how hard it is to find Latinos that are in the world of science. So we as a community need to do a better job of highlighting those individuals. So anyway, focusing, like I said, in the geography, historical figures, contributions of Latinos to America, talking about and when I say contributions, I'm talking about buying power. The Latino community, I think they said if you took the Latino population, it would be like a country in its own, because they have huge buying power. Latinas are like the number one, prior to COVID-19, the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. This year, for the first time, the Latino population is going to be the largest minority population eligible to vote. So, I mean, the power of the vote is so important. So that definitely needs to be taught in schools. And then lastly, I would say Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of taking like one semester and yeah. Yeah. I look at my daughters now, and I have an app that I'm studying on my phone, and my daughters were huddled around the couch this morning doing it. And I was like, man, why is this not like a thing in school? Like I don't know. It's just because my daughters learn so quickly. Like me, I've got so much junk up here that I'm like, it's hard. But like my daughter, like I did a sentence and then I got it wrong. And the next time it came up on an app, she's like, oh, Daddy, it's this, this, and this, and this. Like she had it like that. And
yeah, kids are amazing.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, an hour a week or something, just anything besides nothing. So
how often do you practice? You say you have this app.
Here we go.
30 minutes a week.
So I had the app, and I was doing it like at the end of last year, like about 15 minutes a day. I would just say, you know what, I'm going to take 15 minutes. So I don't know, what is that? Like an hour and some a week. So I was doing it, and I was, I got very frustrated. I was learning, and I was learning words and some sentences, but the app is it's just weird because sometimes you're just writing it down, and I want to start talking. If you show me something on a piece of paper, I don't really understand it as much as I'd rather start talking to somebody and using it. So I think I got frustrated, and I stopped using it for a few months. And I've just recently, over the last like 2-3 weeks, I picked it up again. I'm starting to do it again. But yeah, I was just getting frustrated because I'm like, what? I'm like, the sentences they put in these apps, I'm like, who talks like that? So I don't know. I was getting frustrated myself.
Yeah, no, it can be frustrating because, the older you get, the harder it is to retain a language. And that's not me being ageist, like that's a fact. It's easier to learn languages when you're a kid, right? So
2 decades of drinking in New York City has destroyed this brain.
But you have to be immersed in it. You have to practice it, right? So I am more than happy to offer my services. You can practice your Spanish with me anytime. Okay. Because I appreciate when people make that effort. I don't care if you sound crazy or I can't understand you. At least you're making an effort, right? And that I really do appreciate. It's so fascinating to me that this country, you go outside of the U.S. and it's perfectly great and acceptable and expected for people to know more than one language. Yeah. But within this country, I don't understand why people don't necessarily want to speak Spanish. Well, first of all, Spanish is very important for the Latin community. When you talk about culture, you cannot talk about culture without talking about the importance of the language. Yeah. And Spanish, no matter where you go in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America, it doesn't matter if you're in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Argentina, Colombia. I mean, we all have different foods and music and art, but we all share that language. Of course, we all have those countries also have their native language as well, but you're gonna be fine traveling to any of those countries because of the language. And so, you know, if we were close to France, you know, I'm sure French would be very prominent, right? If we were close to China, Chinese will be very prominent. And so it's no big surprise why Spanish is very important and very prominent in this country. So I'm not saying, you know, you should definitely learn it, but I'm saying it's definitely helpful. And so I actually appreciate people that want to learn it. So good for you.
Thanks. I mean, I'm trying. Yeah, like I said, I got frustrated at the end of the year. I was doing pretty well, but it's just hard when you're not using it. You know.
Let me ask you, in your line of work, you know, you do event plannings and things like things like that with mezcal, you know, tequila, and so in your line of work, is Spanish important? Do you think would be beneficial? Like, what drove you to want to learn this language?
Well, one, you know, I'm in the hospitality industry for over 20 years, right? And half the people that I work with speak Spanish. That's one of the things. But two is, you know, I do Arte Agave, right? So I found myself, when I started Arte Agave, was this kind of little tequila mezcal festival that started to grow and grow and grow, and started becoming more Latin culture through, you know, culinary and through music and artists. And so every year I started doing Arte Agave, got bigger and bigger and bigger, and started going to different cities. And I found myself, I'm like, you know, and I always found myself talking to the community and saying, hey, is this appropriate? Are we doing things correctly? Is this right? Who do you recommend we bring in? So I was always very resourceful and trying to make sure that I was, you know, adhering to culture and making sure everything was correct. But then I started looking deep at myself, and I'm like, man, well, you're doing all these events that are starting to be cultural events, and you don't even understand the culture, and you don't even speak the language. You know what I mean? So poo on you. And I started to, you know, no one ever really called me out, but it was just like, I was like, dude, if you're going to go deeper into these events and in these kind of things, you gotta better yourself. And, you know, so take aim at it. And I started to talking to a couple other people in DC and some of the brands, and they were really nice, but some people started calling me out. They're like, seriously? Like we don't care that it's you, the white freckly boy, but you got to speak the language, dude. And I was like, okay, all right. You're calling me out, and fair enough. So, you know, I took it upon myself at the end of, like, you know, DC last year to say, okay, start doing better. One, learn the language. That's why I got the app. And then this podcast, I was like, it made it my mission to really understand the people and other cultures and things of that nature. And like I said, I didn't want to be somebody just throwing a tequila mezcal festival. If I'm going to say Latin culture attached to my events, I better damn well understand some of that. You
want that street cred.
Yeah. And listen, I'm surrounded by other people that are in my events that are, you know, Mexican or Dominican, or, you know, I mean, I have friends that, you know, but I'm like, you know, I'm kind of the guy when it comes down to it. And so yeah, I just, you know, it was kind of my personal mission to learn it and understand it. And the fact that I don't even know Spanish, I was like, man, you know, like all my friends too, you know, I have a friend that she speaks like 4 different languages. I have another friend that goes to Italy, and then she goes here and she speaks 3 languages. I'm like I can at least speak 2 by the end of my life. Like, so, and that's my goal. That's what I've set out to do.
Good. You can do it. You definitely, I actually had a friend who learned Spanish by watching novelas.
That's what, see, a lot of people told me that. They're like, just start watching.
Yeah, the Spanish channel and the music and speaking to friends.
The music is hard, but my wife and I listen to the music all the time. We love it. Like, we're just jamming, but it's so fast, and the beats, and I don't even understand like English music and what they're saying. So yeah, I don't even know the words. Like, I'll start singing. My wife's like, you don't even know this song. I'm like, I don't know what they're saying. So when it's in Spanish, I really have no clue what they're saying. So anyway, music is not good for me to learn, but maybe some TV would help out.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. I wanted to ask you, I know we've had this conversation before, you know, doing all these events, right? So I mean, speaking of the events that I did, Arte Agave, you know, on our website, it used to say, you know, Latino, you know, culture, music, and heritage. And a friend of mine called me up, and she's like, hey, you know, you might want to drop the O from Latino, and that was a couple years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, I was like, okay. And she was like explaining it to me, and she's like, you might want to add an X after it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, why the X? And she kind of sent me a couple articles on it. So I started doing some research, and then I reached out to some people, and I don't know, I was very confused. And I was like, I get it, dropping the O to make it gender neutral. And then I saw a post of yours on Facebook sort of calling it out a little bit. And then I had some other people that I was friends with on Facebook that just were like, some people were for the X, and some people were like, I don't understand why other people are changing our language. So I know we had a quick conversation about this. I wanted to get your perspective on sort of what's happening with the Latin language and the X, or why not the X? And I don't know, maybe you could throw a little perspective on what's happening.
No, that's actually really good. Those are really good questions, because it can be confusing. And I can only imagine what it's like for you, right? If we're confused within our community, I know how confusing it must be for you. So a few years ago, I started hearing or seeing posts and articles on this whole X thing, and Latinx. And I wasn't sure what that was all about. So I started doing my research and wondering, where's this coming from? Because if I'm over here advocating for Latino representation, I need to know what this is about.
Yeah.
And then in my research, and this was a few years ago, in my research, I started looking at articles, started looking at chats, started looking at social media posts, and I realized that, the whole use of the X is because people wanted to be more inclusive. This was like right before marriage equality was legalized, and so on and so forth. And so it was kind of like a show of solidarity that people started using the X because of, to show, started using the X to show solidarity. So, which is great, within the Latino community. I think we definitely need to make space for those topics. However, I didn't disagree with the use of the X because it appeared that it was being, the people that were pushing for this were not necessarily Spanish speakers. And the reason why I say that is because when you talk to a Spanish speaker, it doesn't make any sense because our language is gender-based. So, people will say, well, English, we could easily use an X, what's the big deal? Well, Spanish, those who know Spanish know that unfortunately it's gender-based, and this is, it's been like this forever. So people that were promoting this were mainly Americans who didn't necessarily, or even Latinos who did not necessarily speak Spanish. And then another justification for it was that it was to protest against imperialism, right? Against the Spanish conquistadors who came to Latin America and eradicated the Native Americans in all of these different countries. And so it was a way for them to like boycott imperialism. And so therefore this is people saying, therefore, they do not think that it's important to speak Spanish. So let's backtrack. So you have folks that are saying Spanish is not necessarily important when it comes to the Latino community. And then if you move to the second step is that, okay, now Latino community has to be inclusive, and therefore no more gender-based, so it shouldn't be Latino, Latina, it should be Latinx. And so all of that combined raised a lot of flags for me, a lot of red flags, because as I mentioned earlier, the Spanish language is important to our culture. If people don't want to know it or speak it, even if it's Latinos who don't want to speak it, hey, that's your prerogative. But it's completely different for you to then say, and because it doesn't matter to me, therefore it shouldn't be important to you. And then, so, and that's why I just don't agree with the use of the X, is because it didn't come, it didn't, it's not like they took a poll, whoever they is, it's right. Not like they took a poll and polled the Latino community and said, hey, will this work for you all? We think that this is going to be better for, Latino community. Like, it's just something, and I hate to say it, but
say it.
Okay, I'm gonna say it. It just seems like it's something that like hipsters kind of came up with, and people just kind of went along with, because they didn't want to be seen as opposed to inclusion or equal rights. And so people just, accept it. And back in the day, a few years ago, remember I said I started doing my research years ago. I didn't really worry about it, because I said, well, this is, to me, like, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't think much of it. But then for some reason, the last year or two, it's just exploded. Yeah. And now I'm one of the ones saying, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense to us. We feel like you're diluting our language. And for example, if you try to explain Latinx to someone who doesn't speak English, try explaining it to your mama or your tia, abuelita, that don't speak English. They'll look at you like you're crazy. And so that's why I just I started seeing it everywhere, hearing it in shows, and people are using it, out of the goodness of their hearts, I think, right? Because they just want to be more inclusive. But at the same time, if we stay silent, I feel like you are diluting a part of who we are. Yeah. And it was so interesting you mentioned that post, because you see a lot of people out there, chats and posts advocating for Latinx, but you don't really see a lot of information on people on the other point of view or the other side. And so when I saw that article and I posted it on Facebook, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a lot of like comments on it.
Yeah, I read everything.
And all of a sudden, like all of my friends, not all of my friends, but a lot of my friends were basically saying, thank you for saying this. Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging. Thank you for saying what I couldn't say myself.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people were coming out of the woodwork saying, I feel the exact same way. But like, again, not everybody's willing to speak up, because maybe they don't care that much, or like I said, they just don't want to be seen as against something.
Yeah, because the other side is going to get angry, and they're not complying to the new thing. And that's what's thinking. Like I said, I saw a couple other friends that I had that, acquaintances that were like, what is this? And their threads were the same way. So I was like, okay, so it's not like I said, it wasn't a poll. Everyone voted yes, and then became this. It's like, it's just sort of this thing that was started probably by some dude that looks like me that said, hey, let's all be like inclusive. And then,
and I'm like, look, we're already like this crazy, diverse groups of people, right? Yeah. Why do we want to complicate our lives even more? If you don't want to use Latino, Latina, use Latin.
Yeah, right.
And so I started questioning, a lot of my friends who were using the X, and they agree. They say, you're right. It doesn't make any sense, but what can I do? Like, this is the new thing. And I said,
it's a new thing.
So we just have to like just go with the flow and accept, I just don't know, honestly. Well, but at least we're now having a dialogue, and people aren't like staying quiet and just like biting their tongue and saying, yeah, I'll just do what's cool nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how I was. I was just sort of in the middle. I saw everyone sort of posting on Facebook about putting the X, and I wasn't about to chime in anywhere and ask any questions. And I think that's kind of the problem these days, is that I would love to have asked the question, and not coming from a clueless place, but just coming from a place of like, I want to know why, I want to understand. And I feel like a lot of people can't have this conversation that you and I are having, because I see, like I said, the Facebook threads, and I sort of want to just jump in and be the guy who asks the question. But if I've seen threads where I've had a question in my head, I've seen somebody else ask that question, and that person just gets destroyed. And I'm like, good thing I didn't ask the question. But I was just like, why can't someone just honestly answer it and describe it and let people understand, have that discourse? So yeah, I mean, like I said, I appreciate you talking about it and being able to have that discourse with you. And like I said, I think that's what's lacking sometimes, that they're not allowed. They have to comply to the new norm made up by somebody, and that's it. So deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for talking about that. Like I said, I've been trying to get to the bottom of everything, and I like to just get everyone's opinion.
So I know going back to, I'm so sorry, I forgot to say something about the people that see them, the people that don't want to speak Spanish and use the X, as a way to like I said, boycott, like imperialism or whatever. That's crazy to me, because yes, you may not necessarily agree with what the Spaniards did like 500, 600 years ago, but we're all like a mix, a big, beautiful blend now. So for you to say, I'm not going to speak Spanish because, of those Spaniards that came over, that's crazy. That would be like African Americans saying, I'm not going to speak Spanish because, because of my ancestors were slaves. So that rationale to me just doesn't make any sense.
So there's a group in there that just don't want to speak Spanish anymore.
Yeah, they a lot of not all Latinos speak Spanish, unfortunately, because after generations of being here, they tend to lose it. If they don't, practice it at home. But then there's a certain segment that sees they feel like when you come to this country, you need to acculturate. Yeah. And so you need to like let go of that. And so that may have been the case back in the day, in like, the 50s, the 40s and the 50s. But nowadays it's more acceptable for people to acculturate versus to assimilate. It's perfectly beautiful to keep your culture and your language. Maybe that wasn't the case a few decades ago, but now, it's a good thing. But you still have some people that think like that think, well, you need to acculturate to this, and and because they don't speak Spanish, their parents didn't teach them Spanish, they're saying Spanish is not important. I'm Latino still, but the Spanish part is not important. Like I said, it's important. If you don't want to speak it or learn it or teach your kids, that's okay. That's your right. But it matters.
So, yeah, if you could, obviously, I love your story, and going from a war-torn country, to America, and eight kids. You had a single mom. Like, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing what you're doing. If you could, send a quick message to the young Latino, girls of America today, is there something that you would tell them, look out for this, do this, be aware of that, or just go for it? Or, if you could give a quick message.
I would say to be proud of your history and your heritage. I know there was a point in my life in like elementary school where, I had changed my name from Maria to Mariah.
Mm.
What? Yeah. And so, like I said, it wasn't until I got to maybe college that I learned the power of what it meant to be Latina in this country. And so I would just say be proud of your heritage and your background and your language and your culture. Um, Surround yourself with mentors, people that are going to support you. You need a good support system. I would not be where I am today had it not been for other people who saw something in me and gave me good advice, and open doors for me, to have strength to do, new things, have uh, a strong sense of self, know your worth. At the end of the day, as a woman and as a Latina, you are going to come face to face with a lot of adversity, a lot of judgment, discrimination, and obstacles. But at the end of the day, know your worth, and work hard. A lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of times we tend to work hard or harder than most people in the room for less or even a fraction of what other people make. Just don't be afraid of the hustle. It'll pay off.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, listen, thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate this. For anyone listening, is there, for Pro Hispanica, can people check it out? Can they donate? Is website, Instagram, how can people check that out?
Yeah, so it's Prospanica DC, I'm sorry, prospanica.org/Washington DC. And then also we're on social media. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Prospanica DC.
Cool.
So thank you so much. This was fun.
This is a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing your story with me.
No, I don't know what it is. You got me to open up. Well, I don't usually do this.
Well, I'm glad I got to open it up. And I'm excited. Hopefully we can start getting out again together. And I'm still, my goal is to get Arte Agave back to DC this year. But sort of in a holding pattern to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I told you before, I'm a huge fan of Arte Agave. I love how you bring together all those different aspects of Latin American culture. And we had a great time when you came. I'm looking forward to the next one. But even before that, let's chat, let's hang out, let's do more activities in the future, in the near future, hopefully.
I'm in. Well, cool. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate you. So that's it, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.